Hello and welcome. My name is Sydney Ross. I'm the Outdoor Education Manager for Deep Roots, and we have a wonderful show for you today: Native Plants at Noon, Pond Stewardship, and Aquatic Native Species. In today's episode, we will discuss several different native aquatic species, how to plant native plants in a water setting, as well as different management techniques. Please stick around for the entire program and be sure to put your questions in the Q&A so our experts can answer them live towards the end of the show. Before we begin, I just have a couple of notes off the top for y'all. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Missouri Department of Conservation, for connecting people to nature in their backyards and beyond. I'd also like to thank our donors and viewers like you for continuing our fun educational programs like our webinar series, Native Plants at Noon. If you love native plants but need some assistance with how to manage them, consider joining me 5 times a month at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center, where you can learn skills, enjoy camaraderie, and have fun. The goal for these programs is for people to feel empowered about how to manage native gardens, because as we all know, it's one thing to plant a garden and another to grow. I want to tell you about our program this Saturday, which may be of interest for y'all who want to learn how to design native gardens. This Saturday from 8 to 11 a.m. at the Discovery Center, we will have a collaborative design program where we will be discussing how to design both part of the demonstration garden as well as the bioswales at the Discovery Center. Following today's program, I will include a link to that sign up. There are only about 10 spots left, so consider joining us. And if you can't make it Saturday, we do this 5 times a month, so there's all kinds of opportunities and different topics to explore. This webinar will be recorded, and as I mentioned, all the resources will be emailed to you today following today's program. And when you receive that email, if you don't mind completing the survey to let us know how we did today. I'd also be interested in knowing what kind of topics you all want to hear or learn about for the year 2025. So please be sure to complete that survey when you receive it in your email later today. After today's webinar, please visit us online at deeproots.org for more information on upcoming events, webinars, native gardening resources, and more. Consider making a donation while you're there. All right, and before we jump in to our program today, I'd like to go ahead and welcome our guest experts to the virtual stage. We have both Caleb Pemberton, who's the Fisheries Biologist for MDC, as well as Kelsey Brown, who is the Fisheries Crew Leader for the Missouri Department of Conservation. Hey folks, how's it going?
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
I would love for y'all to just kind of introduce yourselves, give us a little bit of insight about your background and what you do at James A. Reed Memorial Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah, so as Sydney said, my name is Caleb Pemberton. I'm a fisheries biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation. I cover private lands with a lot of just landowners with private ponds or streams and whatnot, mostly in the Kansas City area, Jackson County, Cass County, and Lafayette County. I'm originally from Central Missouri, so while this is kind of a new home, it wasn't ever too far from me, so it's nice to be in the area.
Yes.
My name is Kelsey Brown. I'm a fisheries crew leader here out of James A. Reed. So part of my job is to monitor and maintain the lakes around here, especially when it comes to the aquatic plants. I was born and raised in Independence, so I spent a lot of time both at James A. Reed and just at the water bodies around here. So very passionate and very happy to be working it.
Thank you all so much. We are so thrilled to have you here as our guest experts today. Admittedly, native aquatic plants are not my specialty, and so I have learned a ton from you all already, and I look forward to you joining us at the end for the live Q&A, where folks in our audience can submit their questions during today's program, and we will have a riveting conversation about all things native aquatic plants and pond management. So thank you all.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start today's program. I hope you all enjoy. And again, be sure to include your questions in the Q&A and we will discuss them then. Oh, and actually one more thing. I almost forgot. During our Q&A, we will also have a pop quiz. So just to test your knowledge and see if you're paying attention during the webinar. And for whoever gets the correct answer first will win this wonderful Izel Plants t-shirt. Get it here on the screen. Kind of a tongue in cheek, but it says grow weed, milkweed, and features our native butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa. So stick around. We've got a great show for you today, and I hope you enjoy Native Plants at Noon, Native Aquatic Species.
My name is Kelsey Brown. I'm the Fisheries crew leader here for MDC out of Lee Summit.
And I'm Pemberton. I'm a fisheries biologist. I'm also at Lee Summit.
We're at James A. Reed Memorial Wildlife Area here in Lee Summit. There's 12 lakes here, roughly 3,000 acres. Lots of different aquatic species, lots of fishing opportunities for the public. We have a different selection of native aquatic plants that you're most common to find on Missouri water bodies here at James A. Reed and anywhere across the state. So we're going to highlight a couple of those for you, tell you the uses you can use them in your pond, the things to look for, benefits. This one's probably going to be the most recognizable plant in Missouri or any waterway in the continental United States. This is a fragrant water lily, most commonly known by the lily pad here. The thing that separates fragrant water lily from, say, an invasive like lotus is this Pac-Man mouth that's cut out into the leaf shape. If it were a full circle disc, that's actually an invasive plant. They also make the same kind of flower, but the good one is the one with the Pac-Man mouth.
That's so cute.
And they make a beautiful bloom.
Wow.
Blooms for usually a day or two. Pink is my personal favorite. When it comes to growing in a water body, there's pink and white varieties of this. The pink grows at a slower rate, whereas the white can grow a little faster, and it can be harder to keep up in those smaller water bodies.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to aquatic plants in your ponds, in your water gardens. These plants, when they're green, they help produce oxygen in the water, which is great for our fish and for our other aquatic organisms. All the plants that we have here today primarily are shoreline or emergent plants. So that's going to add to bank erosion protection, which is great. That's going to be less work on landowners if they don't have to worry about erosion. And then these are also great habitat for anything from small fish to aquatic insects, frogs, and just help with the overall food web dynamics of your pond, making it a more healthy and complete ecosystem. I definitely love the pink lily. That's my favorite flower in Missouri, and it just happens to be aquatic. But then also right here we have a pickerel weed. This is one of my other favorites, just because it's super easy to establish, and then you can see that real pretty just cluster of small purple flowers. And pickerel weed blooms most of the summer into the fall, really until the first frost. So it gives you that all of those benefits I mentioned, and then the aesthetics on top of it's just icing on the cake.
There's 3 types of aquatic plants. You're going to have your submerged. Those are things like coontail, milfoil, the stuff that's under the water that you can't really see. Then you're going to have emergent, which is going to be things like this. And then you're going to have floating, which are things that are technically under the water, but the leaves float on top of the water. So something like a lily. Those generally go in deeper water, I'd say 10 to 12 inches. Your shoreline is probably going to go about 6 inches, and your submerged plants, you want them submerged. So this is one of the most common aquatic plants you're going to see in the state of Missouri. It's called arrowhead. It has been used by Native Americans for many years for eating purposes. You can eat the root system. The flowers, I think, are beautiful. They're great pollinators. They self-seed, so as these dry out, they'll start to drop the seeds into the water, and they'll spread freely across a water body. They're one of the most easily recognizable. It's called arrowhead, well named for the shape of the leaf, which is an arrow. They come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a skinny variety. They can get as big as this. They grow just about this high, usually about hip, knee length, not much higher than that. They'll bloom through October as well, just with the pickerel weed. So things you might hear it as is Katniss, duck potato, and then arrowhead is the one you'll see in textbooks. So these get fat and stocky, and these get really skinny.
Oh,
Same
wow.
plant, just different subspecies of that plant. And this one might not be the whole potato, but they'll grow a big bulb at the end. I don't feel it for this one. But eventually it will grow a big bulb like a potato would in your garden bed.
Very cool.
So you can just reach down into the mud and feel around for it. It's pretty claustrophobic in that pot. But if you just follow down the stalk and then feel through the roots, you'll be able to find them.
That's very cool.
These are going to be some of your taller shoreline plants, whereas these are in 6 inches of water. These prefer 3, barely touching for the most part. The first one here is called water willow. It has a very crazy root system that you can see down here. It is amazing at holding your shorelines together because of that dense root system. You plant it in about 3 inches of water. It holds up to wind, water erosion, spreads very easily. You can roll them up into bundles and just throw them out into the water and they'll self-seed that way.
Wow.
You have the ability to plant them in as you would any other plant. The only downside I would say with water willow is sometimes it gets hard to fish through. It can get really clumpy. It can take your hook. They have pretty thick stalks. This is the thickness that it can get, and it will take over this whole shoreline. It can go out to 3 to 4 feet. So it can get really, really dense. You can see here, like, pretty thick in there with all of it. So an alternative to that is going to be our spike brush here. So it grows about to the same height as water willow. It's going to give you the same benefits for the water erosion, but this is very soft. You're going to be able to fish through it a lot easier. Doesn't get taller than this. It's perfect for that first 5 to 10 feet of your lake where you don't want to be mowing anyways. So it gives you that same grass look if this was in your yard or around your house. And then this one is our tallest one. This is called a soft brush. So it does the same thing as these other two. It holds the shoreline together, has a very dense root system, but it does get incredibly tall. But very easy to see by these soft things here. That is going to be your seeds. Again, all these plants are modified in order to drop their seeds into the water and spread themselves. So it's getting ready to do that. Again, it's a very easy plant to break. It's very soft. The only thing is you would have the height compared to the soft brush. The biggest thing in moving plants around is making sure you keep them in the same water body. And if you're moving water bodies, to make sure you give them 30 to 60 days to find invasive species, any kind of algae, moss, bugs, anything you don't want to add to your water body. That 30 to 60 days is a good chance to give them a chance to calm down, get some good growth in, get some good root growth. You can see most of these pots, the roots are coming out of the bottom now. So that makes them a little bit easier to establish once you get them into a new location. So this is our first staging tub, and then down there at the end we have a second staging tub, and those plants are ready to be planted at any time this year once we find a location for them. Each aquatic plant grows in a different way. Most of them are going to grow in a rosary or rosette, a cluster, and they grow on what's called a rhizome, so they just grow on a continual line forever and ever and ever. Plants like lilies, you can grab just a chunk. This is simply just a chunk of the root, and you can just grab that straight out of the submerged water and put that in a pot. That's what all of these are.
Oh wow.
Some have taken, some haven't. As you can see, I pulled a lot, so we'll go and pull again, and just until we get as many as the tank down there.
That's amazing.
This is fragrant pink water lily.
Oh, cute.
Of the water lilies, I would say pink over white. Whites grow at a faster rate than pink and can take over. Pinks, I think also pink flowers, just a lot prettier. But they're a little bit easier to manage in a smaller pond or for someone who's doing this on their own. A lot of it is self-management. So when it comes to lilies, if you just rip off the lily heads, it won't grow past that. In any kind of water system, you don't want more than 20% of plants. That's just so you can keep the oxygen levels good, make sure you're getting enough sunlight, taking care of if you have any fish in there, but 20% is kind of the golden rule for any aquatic plant in any water body. Algae is completely natural. It's usually from runoff and an excess of nutrients. You can chemically treat it. That does start to get a little expensive. Some people aren't into using chemicals, which is totally fine when you're messing with fish, plants, water. Usually a heavy rain, the right temperatures, it all goes away. But it is just a natural part of having a natural water body. This is probably one of the easiest things to get into when you're trying to look at restoring your lake, pond, or any water body. These plants do really good at holding your shoreline together. They're beautiful. You get flowers, you get pollinators. They make great fish habitat. You have waterfowl food, places for them to spawn, get away from predators.
You're going to wind up with a lot of other critters, frogs, insects, aquatic insect larvae, maybe some crayfish, maybe even some salamanders, turtles. You'll definitely have mosquitoes. Some aquatic insects will actually feed on the mosquito larvae, and then some of our dragonfly species will feed on mosquitoes too. Bats, birds, there's other things that can help with mosquitoes, but there are mosquitoes in standing water.
And what about mosquito dunkers? Are those things that you utilize in a pond setting, like, I guess, for maybe smaller scale?
Maybe for smaller scale, it's never something I've had to do when it comes to these. Every once in a while, we'll kind of have a bug bloom. Depends on the drought year. But for the most part, the biggest problems I have are cicadas. I have a lot of dragonfly larvae and frogs. That's usually what I get. But I haven't had a big mosquito problem, thankfully. So when I collect my plants, if you're doing this in the same water body, you can skip this step. I just get topsoil from Ace Hardware. These are some cheap plastic pots. I take the plant out of wherever I want it. I make sure I hose off the roots until they're as clean as I can possibly be, and that's to help with making sure I don't have any invasive, any hitchhikers coming along with me. I pour in that topsoil from Ace Hardware, and then these have sat for almost a year. That topsoil is totally okay to put into your water body, but if you're picking up a plant and putting it in the same water body, this step is not important. Then you'll come out and you'll try and find a nice, good, muddy spot. The key to this is keep your shovel in the water as you dig. As you dig, it's going to get really turbid, and it's really easy to lose that hole that you just dug. So I usually dig maybe a hand length down, give or take some. Making sure I move the mud out of the way. When I dig this hole, my goal is to make it a V. And then I will press this plant into a V shape as well so it fits into that hole. So then I take this and I just kind of press it down so that way it is a V to match the hole I've just made in this water. And then you simply just go and you push it in. You want to push it down as much as you can. It's really hard to hurt these. They're pretty resilient. And then if you can find some of the mud that you just dug up, throw some of that on top. Make sure it's nice and secure, and you walk away. That's it. If you're planting multiples and you're going to have it here for a year, give or take, we have a cage system that would go on top of this, and that's to keep turtles out, things that are coming to eat the roots as it grows. Try and protect it a little bit. You'll keep that cage on until the plant starts to grow outside of that cage. Feel around the best you can. You might like hit rocks and stuff, but a lot of it is just I'm feeling with my left hand while my right hand digs.
We've had it where you're planting maybe a few hundred plants at a time in a couple different bodies of water, and you get pretty good about getting that spade, making a big wedge, smashing that root, putting it in there, packing it in, and you'd be shocked with especially some of these species that Kelsey's planting, how quickly they recover and even start expanding if the weather's right, nutrients are right.
That's awesome.
And I will say, like, when planting these, right, there's maybe a foot or two of shoreline. Should we get really hot again, all this water could disappear. Now I've put these into dry dirt. So that's something to also be aware of as you plant your shoreline plants, making sure that you're thinking of water fluctuation.
All of these plants, just like a garden, are going to have future maintenance. And that's something that we have in booklets. We have an awesome how to establish aquatic plants in Missouri. And that
That'll break down ease of establishment and then future management and how likely it is. And most of them are going to say eventually needed or likely, just like anything, just like any terrestrial plant, it needs some maintenance. Otherwise, it takes over. It becomes a nuisance itself.
For something like was it called a fragrant lily?
Mhm.
For the fragrant water lily, what's the minimum like amount of water that you could plant that in?
I'm gonna say you at least need a couple acres. I wouldn't go put it in your 1 acre pond. It will take over that very quickly.
And you
At
can
least a
put it
couple.
in smaller bodies of water. It's just that when you do like a water garden, you're going to need to control it more. And that could be by hand if it's a small enough body of water. But it will take over, cover your whole water garden, or maybe even most of your 1 acre pond, and it's just future management.
That's a great reason though to then just give some to your friends.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is management could you're just removing, like in that case, like thinning out
Yeah.
plants.
And you can do that chemically, or you can do it mechanically by hand. Just ripping out the plants before they flower, before they go to seed, is a great way to control it without having to involve chemicals.
So, another control method besides manually removing your plant species may be grass carp. While grass carp are not native to Missouri or really to the U.S., they're genetically modified to not be able to reproduce. So your private hatcheries have these grass carp available for purchase. Those grass carp are going to focus on those submerged species first that Kelsey mentioned, but they can be a control agent for these emergent species as well. They will not help with algae or duckweed. They just won't. That's just not in their diet plan. The other big control method that we've talked about is aquatic herbicide. The main thing about aquatic herbicide is it wouldn't be here if it wasn't safe, but label is the law. Read the label, follow the label, and it's the most efficient method. If you have a pond that's going to be an acre or more and large scale, herbicide is going to be much easier than manually removing. Most of these aquatic plants are fragment spreaders or seed spreaders. So you can imagine if you rip out some plants, there's going to be fragments that you miss. The wind's going to take them or something's going to take them, and it's just going to wind up somewhere else in your pond. While the herbicide is going to systemically kill off the plants, control the plants.
Does the herbicide harm wildlife?
So when used properly, it does not. Now, it is August, even though it doesn't feel like it. And so when water temperatures are really, really high, and when the air temperature is really high, we want to shrink down the area that we're treating. If we treat too much of an area, the plants will die all the same. When the plants decompose, that process takes oxygen out of the water for your fish, and that can inadvertently cause fish kills. The chemical itself doesn't make the water toxic for fish. That's not what kills them. It's the oxygen levels from the plants dying off.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed that footage and a little bit of insight on native aquatic species and pond management. I'm going to go ahead and welcome back both Caleb and Kelsey to the virtual stage, and we're going to dive into our Q&A. So folks, if you have questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A section on Zoom so that we can see them and start answering them. All right, y'all. So let's dive in, shall we? Okay, so the first question that Barbara is asking, she has a small wildlife garden about 7 by 10 feet. She's interested in native plants. She's asking where she can get freshwater mussels to filter this pond as she cannot snorkel. So I think maybe thoughts on both because of the scale of the pond, maybe some recommendations on plants, as well as your thoughts on freshwater mussels.
Yeah, so I'll address the mussels first. I have no idea, unfortunately. And we have a lot of protected mussel species in the state of Missouri. So as far as going and kind of collecting your own, I'd have to do some research on those regulations. But I'm sure some of the more common species, you could do that. but without snorkeling or essentially swimming for them, digging them up out of the muck, it'll be a pretty tough find. I'm not sure if they're going to be, if there's a market for them at all.
Before you move on to the next part, are there other options for filtering besides mussels?
There's snails as well. I mean, they bottom feed. They're, you know, and for something like a water garden, they're gonna climb up anything from vegetation to linings. If the pond is lined, they'll, you know, move around all over the place and filter feed, especially on like, they'll feed on like little algae particles and things that are attaching to the pond lining. But as far as filters, I mean, even your aquatic plants will do some of that depending on the plants. But I mean, water gardens, from my experience, mostly have like algae problems or like plant problems that we don't want. Usually because of the flow, if it's a one with flowing water, that kind of helps stir it up to where it stays relatively clear with its own filter system, but it just depends on the water garden.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then the other part of Barbara's question, do you have recommendations for aquatic native plants for a garden that small?
Yeah, so you know, size does matter, but the good news is about a small water garden is hopefully it would be easy to plant, but also remove plants if they became too much. Saw the pickerel weed in the video. I mean, that's one of my favorites. Well, I'll probably be saying that a lot just because of how aesthetically pleasing it is. Pollinator, big leaves, all of that. If you only had like one adult plant and kept it from spreading, or if you had a couple of them, I think that that'd be fine. But it depends on what you want for your water garden. There are some other options. Trying to think of some. I have a book here that I was going to mention. So if you see me looking at the book, it's just to try to make reference of some. There's a few that I'm trying to think of that are smaller, such as like mud plantain. That's one that wasn't in the video, but is in this booklet. That's another native water shield, a native aquatic plant that mud plantain grows in a small clump, kind of similar to what you saw with pickerel weed, but it doesn't grow up. It just stays, I mean, 6 inches might be the tallest it gets, and it just grows in a little clump. That one might be a good option along the shoreline of the water garden.
Very cool. And folks, as always, I will include in the resources that I emailed to y'all after this program with a list of species discussed. And Caleb, do you mind holding that book up close to the camera so folks can take a look at that? And for everybody, I will be including PDF links to these wonderful resources that Missouri Department of Conservation has put together for our community. So you'll get your digital copies later today. All right, very good. We're going to move on to the next question. Julie is asking if and how copper sulfate might affect these plants. Now, I'm not familiar with copper sulfate. What do you all know about that?
Yeah, so copper sulfate is an active ingredient for algicide. So that's the main ingredient. That or some other copper complex is for to treat algae, filamentous algae or platonic algae. We want to use all aquatic herbicides properly and legally. Follow the label. Make sure that we mix most of these herbicides properly, dilute them properly. But one of the beautiful things about copper sulfate is it only treats for algae unless it's too hot when you follow the label. And so when used properly, you should really only see it kill off algae, whether that's suspended in the water or that horsehair filamentous algae, while your other plants shouldn't be affected by it.
Good to know. Yeah, there's lots of chemicals out there. And so I appreciate hearing from the experts exactly what to use, how to use it. But then again, remembering that label is the law and to refer to that before you use any kind of chemicals. Okay, moving on. We've got lots of great questions coming in through the Q&A. So we're going to next ask Charles' question about if there are native fish species that can be recommended for a small garden pond. I know you mentioned grass carp earlier, but do you have any other recommendations for stocking native fish?
Yeah, I mean, so grass carp are really big, so or they can get really big. So for like a water garden, they might not have the same ecological or plant control benefits, but you can put in a small water garden. There's minnow species out there, even fathead minnows that you might see at a bait shop. Are that's actually a native fish. Those can be stocked, or you could buy those from private hatcheries, and those are native minnows, and they should do okay in most water gardens unless they just get too hot or too cold. They're only going to get a few inches. They won't get much bigger. I'm not sure how other fish would do, like bluegill. Some of our sunfish might do okay. It probably will take some extra husbandry to make sure that they're not too hot in the summer, and make sure that they don't get too cold in the winter. But you could try most native fish. If they can be in a pond, they might have a chance in a water garden.
Awesome. Okay, now Kelsey, this question is for you from Carolyn. What are your thoughts on cattails? Are they good? Are they bad? What are your feelings and insights?
I personally am not a huge fan of cattail. They get really tall, so if you're talking a small pond, it's hard to fish around that. Especially in a small impoundment and water body, they're going to spread really fast. It has all that little fluff at the end of the season that just spreads everywhere. It's really hard to kill chemically. You have to maintain it a lot, spray a couple times, and then on top of that, you have to usually cut it back as well on top of using chemicals. So a lot of maintenance goes into it. It's really easy to get out of hand. It is beautiful. It's one of those things, if you want it in your water body, you have to make sure you keep it where you want it and don't let it spread out. I wouldn't completely say take it away, but definitely one of those things you have to keep a close eye on.
Okay, good to know. And they are native, correct?
Yes, there's two kind of cattail. You're gonna have there's like a thin version. So you'd have to check me on my name. It's either like thread leaf or thin leaf, something along that, and then the normal cattail that you imagine when you think of a lake. And it's really hard to see the difference of those two until you have them right next to each other.
No problem. I'll be sure to figure that out and include it in the species list. Okay, and Kelsey, I got another question for you. First of all, Hunter says, thanks for the great info. And he asks if there are any plants that you'd recommend for ponds with fluctuating water levels, kind of like a detention pond.
Arrowhead pickleweed are going to be really good for those. While I did go and plant them in the water, arrowhead for sure can thrive in like a wet, muddy wetland kind of environment, I would call it. As long as you have moist soil, those will do just fine. When you start to dip into things like water lilies, your submerged plants, those definitely need consistent water. But a lot of your emergent shoreline plants, they can survive in a wetland too.
Okay, good to know. And now I'm going to briefly pause our Q&A so that we can go ahead and do our pop quiz. So, all right, the question for you all is, and it's going to be the first person to answer this question correctly in the chat. So, based on today's program, what are the 3 types of aquatic plants that were mentioned in today's show? First person to get the answer correctly in our chat will win this fabulous t-shirt or long sleeve shirt from Isel Plants. Very tongue in cheek, if I can get it to the camera. Here we go. Grow weed, grow milkweed. So first person to get that right in the chat. And it looks like we have a winner. It's going to be Deborah Wheeler. So Deborah, if you can message me your information, or I can follow up with you following today's program. Congratulations. Okay, so now back to our program. All right. So Let's see here. Lots of really good questions in the Q&A. So, one question that I thought was interesting is from Christine. Christine said that MDC used to recommend submerged plants for fish. Has that changed? What are the benefits? All of that information. Caleb, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, submerged plants are awesome for fish. They give you all of the benefits that we've mentioned, that we talked about in the video. When they're green, they're producing oxygen. They're awesome fish habitat, aquatic insects. I mean, they're awesome for a pond as an aquatic ecosystem, and they grow really easily. Usually that's the problem, is they grow so easily, they become a nuisance. And the main or most efficient way to get rid of them is chemical. And so I would say that's the downside, and they don't have the aesthetic value as well, I guess, because they're submerged, they're completely underwater. They're for the fish. That's why you plant submerged aquatic plants, is for your fish and that ecosystem, not so much for your aesthetics.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. That's good to know. Okay, Kelsey, I got another question for you from Christine, another, maybe the same Christine. Their water garden that is lined is being taken over by a lizard's tail. Should they just pull them out? They also note that barely any water surface is visible due to large water lily. What should they do?
When it comes to water lily, it grows obviously under the soil, so it's going to grow in that long tubular section. So unless you manually go up and rip all of that up, chemical is going to be the best way to go about it. If you decide to go the manual route, it's going to probably be a multi-year process. You are able to just kind of pluck those lilies off. And as the roots can't produce leaves, they'll simply just stop trying and die. I have a couple places where I've done that for the last 2 or 3 years. I'm on year 4, and like 1 or 2 will only pop up in that area. So it is effective just to sit and rip them up. As far as the lizard's tail, I would also just manually remove that. If they're already at seed, which they might be at this time of the year, make sure you put a bag over them, close it up before you cut them. That way you can try and mitigate the spread of more seed.
Okay, and in regards to your planting technique that you wonderfully demonstrated in today's webinar, Teresa's asking why the V shape when planting? Does it create more section to hold the plant, or why do you crush it in a V and dig that little V hole?
Kind of 2 reasons. One, it's a lot easier to dig a V. You can just take a long rod. If you don't want to have to bend down and use a hand shovel, you can just take a long rod and simply go back and forth like this. And when you do that, it makes a V in the soil. So you've already made that shape. Second reason is you're able to dig kind of deeper when you make a V shape, whereas when you're digging a hole, there's a lot of effort that goes into that. You're fighting water, you're fighting dirt, trying to fall back in, and rocks. So V's quick, it's effective, and then you can simply just shove that plant deep in there, kind of give a push on the top, and your roots are in the soil.
Good to know. Okay, now this is a question that I have for you all, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers do as well. Do y'all have any advice on creating a container aquatic garden? Like, I live in Midtown, Kansas City. I have a postage stamp of a backyard, well, a little bit bigger than a postage stamp, but I would like to create a small aquatic garden. How does one even begin?
You want a good starting vessel. The ones I was showing in the video, those are for livestock. So that thick, durable outside plastic, that's gonna be your holding vessel. You don't necessarily even need dirt or anything. As long as you have a little pot that you put your dirt in, you don't have to put a dirt layer in your tub. These are aquatic plants. As long as you give them water, they'll find a way. And then keeping them in those little pots will kind of keep them from spreading. But you can pick different submerged plants depending on how deep of a tub you start with. Different submerged plants, some are really pretty. Prickleweed, arrowhead, cattail, they'll all grow in a pot and still produce flowers and very beautiful. And you can set that on a back patio and have it there. We just use water from a garden hose when we fill our tubs. It doesn't have to be anything special. So that makes things a lot easier. The biggest problem I would say with having a nursery area is you are creating a habitat. So know that you're going to bring in frogs, insects are going to lay their eggs there. So just make sure you're aware that you're opening the door to that as well.
I think a lot of our viewers love that aspect. I know I do
It
too.
is fun, but
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, right? So yeah, to Peachy B just asked if your if your container aquatic garden attracts frogs, what do they do in the winter time, or what do we need to do to take care of our aquatic garden in the winter time?
when it comes to the winter time, I make sure so anytime I make sure there's a good layer of water on top of them. The video that showed those are all fresh, so we're trying to start them. The second time I have it stays full all the time. I try and leave a good water layer in there. Essentially everything will die, and 9 out of 10 plants that I have are going to come right back in the spring like nothing happened. As far as aquatic creatures, I do try and do a little look before the winter time. If I can scoop out a frog, I've had turtles in there before. But for the most part, they kind of vacate as the water gets colder. And it's not like I'm finding them in the winter time.
Okay, that's good. And then kind of a follow-up question on that. What if you have lots of trees over your pond area, like I'm thinking small container garden? Do you want to prevent those leaves from falling in?
For the most part, yeah, I would. It's just going to add a lot of nutrients into your water as those decompose, and that nutrients is what is going to bring on your algae and those things that you don't necessarily want to make it look pretty.
Okay, so maybe like a screen to go on top or something in the winter?
Yeah, in the fall time, depending on how full you make your water nursery, it could be as easy as just plucking them out every day. As long as you're not getting a heavy amount of leaves in there.
Okay, that's awesome. And I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And folks, we appreciate all your questions that you put in the Q&A. For those that don't get answered live, we will follow up with some answers for y'all with the resources. Okay, so I just want to ask, Laura has a question about some of the ponds you manage at James A. Reed. So she's asking, how large of a mass of these plants do you want to create in that pond, like the example of the one we showed earlier, and why? Like, what are your goals?
General rule, and this is what you're going to find in most of our literature, any kind of textbook you read, you don't want more than 20% of any plant, whether it be floating, submerged, emergent. Past 20%, it starts to take over, starts to snuff out the things you want, but 20% is that happy middle ground of no more, no less.
Okay, good to know. And then finally, Karen is asking about volunteer opportunities at James A. Reed, specifically in terms of plant care for native aquatic species. We've got lots of master naturalists that tune into this program. Is this something that they could contact you about, potentially volunteering their time to support you?
Unfortunately, we don't do a lot of volunteer work when it comes to what I do. A lot of chemicals involved, so more of a safety aspect. But classes like these, I do appreciate you doing this, Sydney, just to spread awareness to aquatic plants. There is going out and trying to find information on it is really hard. So as long as people are interested in kind of taking this into their own gardens, that's a success to me. So.
Well, I want to just thank both of you, Kelsey and Caleb, again, for lending your expertise today. I personally had so much fun creating today's program, and again, learned a ton from both of you. And I look forward to continuing our professional relationship and all the knowledge that you have to offer. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, folks. If you will join us next time for our Lunch and Learn episode. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So our next episode is going to be on Thursday, September 5th, and we are covering Lexington Lake with Johnson County Park and Recreation District. So this is a great webinar to learn about this very cool, diverse area. They have lakes, they have prairie, they've got woodlands. And about 10 days after this upcoming webinar, you have the opportunity to take a hike with me. So be sure to join us next time to learn more about the Guided Naturalist Walk. and everything that you can see at Lexington Lake. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.